What if the man who stopped your truck in the middle of the night wasn't a soldier, but your president in disguise? What if the question he asked wasn't about weapons, papers, or protocol, but about something heavier? Conscience. This isn't fiction. This isn't a dramatization. This is a true story. And it begins on a nameless road in Burkina Faso, where silence spoke louder than orders, and a single decision redrew the line between power and humanity. It was past midnight, when the truck rolled across the Sahel, its headlights cutting through the dust like a scalpel through fog. The moon hung low, tired, distant, casting a pale shimmer that blurred the line between earth and sky. Inside the cab, the driver was alone. Just him, the hum of the tires and 40 tons of government rice. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain. He was just doing his job, delivering food from the northern border to the capital. Or so he thought. He was already behind schedule. Delays at customs, endless paperwork, military clearance, bureaucracy. In a war-torn country was like rust in an engine. Slow, suffocating, but constant. The convoy had started as 3 trucks strong, but the others had been sidelined by mechanical issues. Now it was just him. A single vehicle, a solitary route, and a cargo that, on paper, meant little. But in Burkina Faso, rice was often more powerful than gold, more decisive than bullets. Then came the shadows. At first, he thought they were tricks of the trees or the restless night. But as the road curved near a dense thicket, figures began to emerge. Shapes, solid and still, stepped into view. Soldiers, a line of them, rifles slung low but steady. Their faces were half lit by the moon, half devoured by the dark. Not a word was spoken. Only the presence, cold, unmoving, the kind that dries your throat and dampens your palms. The truck slowed. He braked. 2 soldiers walked forward. One hovered near the passenger door. The other approached the front, boots crunching against gravel. The driver rolled his window down, pulse racing. "Bonsoir," he said, his voice cracking. No response. Then, from behind the line, another man stepped out. Younger, no insignia of rank, no barked commands. But something about him silenced the air. Maybe it was the way he didn't raise his weapon, or the way he simply stared, calm, unreadable, patient. When he finally spoke, his question was soft, but it hit like a weight dropped into still water. "Where is this truck headed?" The driver hesitated. "Ouagadougou, Warehouse 4. I have clearance." "You're alone?" "Yes, mechanical. Failure on the other trucks. I'm the only one who made it." "What's in the back?" "Rice. 40 tons. Government storage." The young man paused, then asked something the driver never expected. "Do you know what's happening in Kaya?" The name dropped like a stone in the cab. The driver shifted uncomfortably. "I heard there's unrest." The young man's voice barely rose above a whisper. "They're boiling leaves, making soup from tree bark. Children haven't eaten in days." Silence. A different kind of checkpoint had just begun. The driver gripped the steering wheel tighter. His lips parted, but no words came. Kaya. He'd heard the name. He'd heard rumors. But rumors in a place like this were as common as dust, easy to dismiss, easier to forget. "I don't make the route," he muttered. "Central Logistics. They handle the orders. I just drive." The young soldier stepped closer, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the space between them. "Of course," the man said, voice still even. "You just drive." There was no sarcasm, no scorn, only something far heavier, disappointment. Not the theatrical kind, but the kind that slips under your skin and stays. The soldier glanced at the tarp-covered cargo. The wind stirred again, lifting a corner just enough to rattle it like a whisper. He turned his eyes back to the driver. "You passed through 3 famine zones," he said. "Did you notice anything?" The driver said nothing. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, but there was only darkness behind. No backup, no witnesses, Just the night, the silence and the question that now echoed in his chest louder than the engine ever had. "I see," the young man finally said, more to himself than anyone else. He stepped back and signaled to the other soldiers. One of them raised a radio to his mouth. Another began repositioning. Boots shuffled, fingers adjusted their grips on weapons, and just like that, the energy shifted. The kind of shift you feel before a verdict, before a sentence. Panic surged through the driver's veins. His voice rose, breaking slightly. "Wait, please. This is government property. I have documents, barcodes. You can scan everything." The soldier didn't flinch. "We're not taking your rice." He paused, then added with quiet finality. "We're taking responsibility." Those words didn't sound like rebellion. They didn't sound like insubordination. They sounded like truth, and truth, when spoken without fear, carries the weight of command. The driver blinked. "Kaya?" he asked, almost whispering. The soldier nodded. "Effective immediately, you'll be escorted. And no, this isn't a hijack. It's a correction." The phrase hit harder than any threat. A correction. As if the road he had trusted all along had always been slightly crooked, and this man, this silent soldier, was the one quietly realigning it. He sat frozen in the cab, heart pounding, hands trembling. For a long moment there was nothing but the hum of the engine and his own breath filling the space like static. Then he nodded, slowly, unwillingly, but undeniably. Outside, the soldier raised his arm. The others responded like clockwork. 2 motorcycles moved to the front. Another truck fell in behind. And the convoy, once bound for the capital, turned around, back the way it came, toward a town left off the maps, toward hunger, toward the people who were never supposed to be on the manifest. The truck groaned as it turned, its tires spitting dust into the darkness. The road ahead was narrower, bumpier, less traveled. The kind of road that had forgotten what headlights looked like. Inside the cab, the silence grew heavier with every passing kilometer. He kept glancing into his mirrors, not out of fear, but out of something stranger. Curiosity. Reflection. Who were these men? Who was that young soldier? And why did every word he said feel less like a command and more like a mirror? The further they drove, the more the landscape shifted. Villages shrank into silhouettes. Tin roofs shimmered like broken mirrors under the pale moonlight. Children ran barefoot between crumbling walls, chasing dogs, chasing nothing. Occasionally, faces turned toward the convoy. Not with hope, not with relief, but with that quiet, hollow resignation that belongs to the forgotten. The driver slowed. The weight in his chest wasn't fear anymore. It was something else. Something slower, deeper, harder to name. Guilt? Maybe. Awareness? Possibly. Or maybe it was the slow birth of conscience, waking from a sleep so long he didn't realize he'd been dreaming. Every time they passed a hamlet, he wondered, had I driven past here before? Did I look? Did I see? At a broken intersection, the lead motorcycle paused, checking direction. Then it pressed forward again. The road to Kaya was more suggestion than structure now. Deep grooves in the earth, evidence of old wheels and desperate decisions. He didn't ask questions. Something about the soldier told him not to. Or maybe told him he wouldn't like the answers. Eventually, the convoy reached the outskirts of Kaya. There were no armed guards, no checkpoints, just an eerie stillness and the thick, invisible weight of human need. The kind of silence that isn't just heard, but felt. Bone deep. The lead bike stopped beside a dilapidated health post. Its windows shattered, its walls tagged by time and war. The soldier got off his bike and walked to the truck cab. "Here," he said. The driver leaned out the window, confused. "There's no unloading zone." "There are hungry mouths," the soldier replied. That was it. That was the permission. That was the protocol. The rear doors creaked open, and from the shadows people began to emerge. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Word spread faster than the engines that had carried the convoy. Feet shuffled, eyes widened. Mothers held their children tighter. Old men leaned on sticks. No one ran. No one begged. They simply gathered. A woman approached cautiously. Her hands trembled. Her eyes darted between the soldier and the truck like she still didn't quite believe it. The young man reached into the truck and handed her a small sack of rice. "This is yours," he said. "No one will take it from you." She didn't say thank you. She just fell to her knees and wept. And in that moment, the driver knew. This wasn't just a delivery. This was revelation. This was justice in its most silent, sacred form. One by one, sacks were passed down. The driver stepped down from the cab, unsure what to do with his hands, with his presence. But the soldier handed him a sack without a word. And so he helped. For once, he wasn't just a driver. He was part of something. By sunrise, the truck was empty. But the square felt full of dignity, of gratitude, of something unnameable that had been missing for far too long. As the soldier approached him again, the driver didn't flinch. He didn't ask questions, he just waited. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "Your clearance," he said. "Signed and sealed. No one will question the diversion." The driver took it, hands shaking. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. The soldier's eyes didn't blink. "Because orders don't matter when people are starving." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd without a salute, without a word, without a name. The driver stared after him, then down at the paper in his hand. And then, at the road they had just come from. What else had he driven past in his life, and what would it take to truly see it next time? The engine ticked softly. The sun rose slowly. And somewhere in the driver's chest, a new question began to grow, a question he couldn't unask. They arrived at the edge of Kaya in silence. No checkpoint. No soldiers standing guard. No barricades. Just a long stretch of crumbling road that gave way to stillness. Not peace. Stillness. The kind that settles into the bones of a forgotten place. The kind that feels like a held breath no one ever let go. The lead motorcycle slowed to a crawl, then stopped beside what might have once been a health post. The building was skeletal now, windows shattered, roof sagging like a tired spine, a place where medicine used to mean something. The soldier dismounted without a word. He walked toward the cab, boots brushing against debris. "Here," he said. The driver leaned out the window. "There's no unloading zone," he said, gesturing at the dirt, the ruins, the absence of any structure. "There are hungry mouths," the soldier replied. And that was it. No logistics briefing, no supervisor's call, no papers to stamp or sign, just that line. Delivered not with command but with conviction. And it carried more authority than any document ever could. He climbed down from the cab. The rear doors of the truck groaned open. Metal gave way to moonlight. For a second, nothing happened. Then, movement. From the edges of the dark, shapes began to form. Not soldiers, not thieves. People. Villagers emerged cautiously, their steps hesitant, as if unsure whether this was real or some trick played by hunger itself. First a few, then a dozen, then more. Women clutching shawls tighter around their shoulders. Men leaning on sticks, their bodies thin but upright. Children barefoot, eyes wide, stomachs swollen not from food, but from absence. No one rushed. "No," one yelled. They simply gathered, staring at the truck as if it were a spaceship, as if hope itself had wheels and a license plate. The soldier reached inside and pulled out a sack of rice. He didn't hand it to a man. He didn't raise it in the air for show. He walked up to a woman in the front of the group. She looked like she had once been beautiful, maybe still was, but time and struggle had worn her down. Her hands trembled, her eyes flinched at every sound. She didn't step forward, so he stepped to her. "This is yours," he said quietly, holding out the bag. Her fingers reached out, tentative, like she expected it to be snatched away at any moment. But when they touched the sack, something broke. She dropped to her knees, clutching the bag to her chest like a newborn, and began to sob. No words, just sound. Raw, trembling, human. The driver stood frozen. He had moved rice for years. Warehouses, markets, depots, pallets stacked high, forklifts buzzing, numbers on paper. He had never thought about what came next, about who came next. Now he couldn't stop thinking. He stepped into the back of the truck. The soldier looked at him, nodded once, and handed him another sack. The driver took it, climbed down, and began to distribute it with the others. No ceremony, no speeches. Just sack after sack passed from hand to hand, from truck to earth, from system to soul. An old man wept quietly as he received his. A child clung to the hem of her mother's dress, too tired to speak. One woman kissed the rice like it was sacred. Another just sat down and stared at it, unsure whether to eat or simply hold it a while longer. And the driver, he kept going. Sack by sack, sweat forming at his brow, dust clinging to his boots, shoulders aching, but for the first time in his life, his job felt right. This wasn't delivery. This was justice. He didn't know how long they worked. An hour? 2? The horizon had begun to pale, stretching pink across the sky like someone peeling back the dark. When the last sack was handed out, there was no applause. Just breathing, just gratitude, just presence. The truck stood empty, but the square was full. Of what? He couldn't say exactly. Dignity, maybe, the feeling of being seen, or simply the warmth of not being forgotten. The soldier approached. Again, no smile. No ceremony. Just a folded piece of paper in his hand. Your clearance, he said. Signed and sealed. No one will question the diversion. The driver took it. Looked down at it. The seal was real. The stamp was there. The barcode matched. Official as anything else in his life had ever been. But it felt different. He looked up, words forming in his throat. Why are you doing this? He asked. The soldier didn't blink. Because orders don't matter when people are starving. And, with that, he turned and walked away, back into the morning, back into the sea of people still receiving their portions. He didn't wait for a reply. He didn't pose for photos. He didn't even tell the driver his name. The driver stood for a long time, the clearance trembling slightly in his hands. He looked back at the road they had come from, at the path he had traveled so many times before. And he wondered, not just what he had passed by, but who? Who had he ignored? What suffering had gone unseen simply because no one told him to stop? And maybe that was the point. He had followed maps. He had followed orders. But he had never followed his eyes. Not really. He turned to see the last of the villagers lining up, some still wiping tears, some too dazed to cry. The soldier moved among them silently, adjusting a strap here, placing a hand on a shoulder there. Not a leader demanding praise, just a man present. The driver watched in stillness. Not because he was afraid, but because he was learning. And deep down, something inside him was shifting. Slowly, quietly, but permanently. This wasn't just a delivery route. It wasn't just a detour. It was a return to humanity. And the road ahead would never look the same again. The sun had fully climbed the sky by the time the driver restarted the engine. The truck was empty now, its frame lighter, but the weight inside him had only grown heavier. He drove in silence, dirt-streaked hands gripping the wheel, eyes fixed on the ribbon of road unraveling ahead. He didn't know what to make of the night behind him. Was it real? Had it happened the way he remembered? Or had he imagined a kind of miracle? It wasn't until an hour into the return journey that his radio crackled. At first it was static, white noise, then came the voice. Attention all units. This morning, President Ibrahim Traoré diverted a government rice convoy to the famine-struck town of Kaya in a personal field intervention. The driver nearly veered off the road. His fingers fumbled for the volume dial, twisting it up as fast as his breath was rising. He stared at the speaker as if it had just spoken in a foreign tongue. The president was reportedly on site through the night, dressed as a frontline soldier. No press were present. No official announcement had been made. His pulse pounded in his ears. His mind raced back to the calm voice. The stillness, the gaze that cut through layers of habit and protocol and looked straight into his soul. It wasn't just a soldier. It never was. The young man, the one who asked about Kaya, who changed the route, who handed sacks of rice to sobbing villagers, was the president. And he never said his name, never demanded recognition. He didn't lead with titles. He didn't hide behind a podium or arrive in motorcades. He simply showed up. No ceremony, no entourage. Just dusty boots, a quiet voice, and a conviction so strong it rerouted an entire mission. Images have surfaced, the radio continued, of the president distributing food alongside local villagers. The driver pulled over, unable to focus. He stepped out of the cab and sat on the steel bumper, his body still, his thoughts thundering. It wasn't that the man was the president. It was that he never acted like one. He never had to raise his voice, never had to explain who he was. Because real power doesn't need to shout. It listens, it moves, it sees. And in that moment, the driver finally understood what had shaken him so deeply. It wasn't fear. It was witnessing leadership in its rarest form, silent, sacrificial, and absolutely human. He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded the clearance document the soldier had handed him at dawn. He hadn't looked closely before. He had been too stunned, too filled with questions. Now he stared at it. His eyes locked on the bottom of the page. There it was. Not a rank, not a badge number. A name, Ibrahim Traoré. The signature was clean. The ink slightly smudged as if it had been written in motion. It wasn't a declaration. It was a message, not a command, but a reminder. He folded the paper slowly, deliberately, and placed it over his heart, not as proof of survival, but as a kind of vow that next time the road forks between orders and conscience, he would choose better. The story of the convoy didn't spread through headlines. It didn't need to. It moved through whispers, through trembling voices in villages, through the kind of storytelling that doesn't need hashtags, just memory. In Kaya, a woman held her sack of rice like an heirloom and told her neighbor, "The soldier who gave this to me was the president." In Bobo Dioulasso, a baker gave away bread one morning. When asked why, he simply said, "Because a man who governs us gave away sleep to walk with the hungry." In a rural school, a teacher picked up a piece of chalk and wrote on the blackboard, "Leadership isn't about being followed, it's about going first." And in a dusty garage on the outskirts of the capital, a man who had once followed orders without question now paused at the beginning of every route. He didn't just check the cargo anymore. He looked at the map, then past the map. He thought about the people not listed, the villages not labeled, the children boiling leaves into soup. One day, a new driver joined the crew. Young, eager, full of questions. He asked him, "Is it true that you met the president, that he gave you orders dressed like a soldier?" The older driver smiled, not with pride, but with something deeper. "He didn't give me orders," he replied. "He gave me back my eyes." The younger man furrowed his brow. The driver explained, "That's what leadership does. It doesn't command from afar. It walks beside you. In the dirt, it doesn't scream. It sees. And sometimes it reminds you, not through speeches, but through silence." His voice cracked slightly, but he continued. That night wasn't about saving a town. It was about saving a soul. A nation's soul, and maybe my own. He looked down at the signature again, Ibrahim Traoré, and knew that it would never be just a name on a form. It was a sentence written in history, an echo that would outlive headlines, a quiet thunder. Because true leaders don't demand loyalty, they inspire it. By going first. By kneeling beside the hungry at 2 a.m. by reminding a driver that the road he takes always leads through people, even the ones we're told to pass by, even the ones no one writes into the plan. The driver sat alone in the cab, the engine silent, the paper still trembling in his hands. The signature at the bottom, Ibrahim Traoré, was no longer just ink. It was a moment carved into his memory. It wasn't proof. It wasn't protection. It was a promise. He folded the clearance slowly like something sacred and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, over his heart. Not to show anyone, not to frame, but to remember. The next time the road split between what's instructed and what's right, he wouldn't just follow directions. He'd look and maybe he'd stop. Days passed, but the story didn't disappear. It spread, not like a broadcast, but like a spark. Quiet, relentless. In a bakery in Bobo Dioulasso, a man gave away bread at dawn. When asked why, he smiled and said, "Because someone up there remembered someone down here." In a rural school, a teacher stood before his class, chalk in hand, and wrote across the blackboard, "Leadership isn't about being followed, it's about going first." And in a garage filled with tired engines and oil-stained floors, the same driver, once a cog in a machine, now paused before every departure. He didn't just check the cargo manifest. He traced the map with his finger. Not for shortcuts, but for stories. He looked beyond the route, for towns not listed, for people left in the margins. One morning, a young driver joined the team. Wide-eyed, curious. He approached the older man cautiously. "Is it true?" he asked. "That you met the president? That he gave you orders dressed as a soldier?" The man smiled, eyes distant, but full. "He didn't give me orders," he replied, a beat of silence. "He gave me back my eyes." The young man blinked, unsure how to respond. But somehow he understood, because some truths don't need to be explained. They just need to be lived, and maybe this wasn't a rescue mission. Maybe it was a wake-up call. One truck, one man, one detour that was never planned, and one decision that turned a delivery into a declaration. A story that reminds us what leadership really means. Not being out front with a flag, but walking beside those who carry the heaviest burdens in the quiet, in the dust when no one's watching. If this story made you pause, even for a second, if it made you think about someone who's been passed by too many times, then it's already done its job. Comment below if you believe real leadership walks beside, not above. Like, share, and subscribe, because in next week's episode we go inside another true story of a janitor who changed $1 billion company from the inside without ever revealing his name. Stay tuned.